Hi, I'm Deborah Williams, and this is Audio Outdoorist. I'm excited to introduce a new series called Campfire Conversations. They're your opportunity to listen in as thought leaders and subject matter experts chat casually and candidly about issues that are important, relevant, and timely. Our hope is that you'll come away with deeper insights as you consider the various perspectives of the participants. As the trade association of the outdoor industry, OIA's aim is to convene the diverse thinkers and changemakers whose work and ideas will steer us toward continued growth. Outdoor industry businesses and employees have been overwhelmed by the impacts of the COVID-19 situation for months now, trying to stay safe while keeping themselves afloat. But as we begin to realize that COVID-19 will be part of our lives for some time, how do individuals and businesses in the outdoor industry move from treading water to being agile and successful in our new normal? That's the question being discussed around the campfire today. Kristen Freeney, OIA's director of the Skip Yowell Future Leadership Academy, which we refer to as FLA, invited two alums of the program, Greer Van Dyke and Ben Christensen, to join her to discuss how members of the outdoor industry can create resiliency to adapt to the changing landscape, stay true to their core values, and even thrive while navigating an uncertain future.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of Outdoor Industry Association's Campfire Conversations. I'm Kristen Freeney, and I oversee the professional education and workforce development programs here at OIA. So my job is really focused at the intersection of education and industry. And I also have the great privilege of directing the Skip Yowell Future Leadership Academy, which, if you're not familiar with FLA, it's a 6-month intensive professional development program for folks who work in the industry. So we delve into a lot of topics that are around leadership, around self-awareness, and self-assessments and career development planning. And then we also talk a lot about industry stuff like data and trends that we're seeing in the industry, outdoor participation, market research, all that kind of good stuff. And speaking of FLA, I am joined today by two awesome FLA friends, Ben Christensen and Greer Van Dyke. So Ben, you were part of Class 1 of FLA back in 2016, which was before my time with OIA. But I'd love to hear kind of where you were at during that time and where you're at now.
Sure. So I was working for Simms Fishing Products then. I still am working for Simms now. My role has evolved a bit over the last several years. Most recently was promoted to Vice President of Operations at the beginning of this year. When I was in the Future Leadership Academy, I was the Director of Sourcing and Financial Planning. So I still have responsibility over those areas of the business. Today, I just have a few more people helping me and have a slightly broader scope than when I was in the program.
Awesome. And Greer, you were part of Class 4, which was just last year. That was my first year with the program. And there's been a lot, tons of change for you in the past, over the past year. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I was at FLA, I was at Smart Wool up here in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and was working in the digital marketing space and had been in digital marketing for about 10 years, but my passion has always been in mental health. And at FLA, actually, I had made the decision to embark on my own and start my own coaching business, which I have done. I left Smart Wool in January of this year and started Windrose Coaching and Mentoring, where I coach organizations and associations and help them navigate through change in an authentic way. And I mentor individuals with change management as well. So a bit of a shift, but for me, it definitely has been a full circle shift. So I'm really happy to be where I am and happy to be talking with y'all about this today.
Awesome. Yeah, so we have a great conversation on tap today around the topic of resiliency. We've been in the thick of this COVID-19 situation for well over 2 months now, and we've all been impacted in some way. Whether that's through dealing with illness in ourselves or family members, dealing with the business impacts, which we've seen a ton of business impacts in the outdoor industry specifically, or whether it's just dealing with the stress of kind of this new normal that's day to day. And so what we're going to dig into is it's around the topic of resiliency, of kind of how we start to move forward, right? We know that there's still a lot of risks, a lot of unknown ahead of us, but how do we kind of start accepting what we're in and moving forward with it, both as individuals and as an industry? So before we really dive into everything, I just want to ask, like, Ben and Greer, how are you doing? How are you making it through? How are things? What are you seeing? That kind of good stuff.
Go ahead, Greer.
Sure. Individually, I feel like every day offers up a different set of emotions. I definitely feel like what I've gone through has been very synonymous with cycles of grief. I feel like, whether in the very beginning there was a lot of shock and then into acceptance mode and some bargaining with that and not only going through each of those over time, but going through those multiple times per day. I think the thing that has really enabled me to be in the spot that I am with a sense of resilience about this whole thing is to really know when I'm getting in a scared reactive place, and I have just some things in my own life that just help kind of pull me out of those, whether it's connecting with nature or speaking up about what I'm going through, but overall doing really well through this. I have taken a lot of solace in seeing that not only is this temporary, but through the process, I'll learn and grow a lot. And when I stick in that place, it makes the harder, darker underbelly parts feel a bit easier to manage.
Yeah, I would say I'm also doing pretty well. We started grappling with this issue in January because of the impact it was having on our supply chain overseas. And at that point in time, it felt like a really big issue. It felt somewhat manageable. It also felt very unpredictable at the same time. I did not anticipate that it was going to impact our business here in the United States, just in terms of the impact on consumers the way that it has. It's been a really powerful learning experience for me, particularly being new to our executive team and having to navigate through something so challenging and so complex. From the very beginning, I have tried to stay hopeful about the opportunities that are emerging along with the challenges. And I feel that at Sims, we've been able to identify and capture some of those opportunities. We changed our manufacturing facility from making fishing waders to making protective medical gowns pretty much right after the shelter-in-place order came into effect here in Montana. And that has been an extraordinary bright spot in terms of morale, in terms of just the inspiration and the satisfaction that comes from a challenging project. And it's also had a financial benefit for the business as well, just to be able to maintain a level of activity in our facility here when it would otherwise be shut down. It's also, I think, forced me to uncover a different level of sympathy for the other people that I'm working alongside as we navigate through this. We inherently have differences of opinion because of the types of work that we do and the things that we're focused on. And I very quickly realized that I needed to really work hard to see things through other people's perspectives in order to find compromise, because emotional disagreement, particularly on an executive team, is, I think, really damaging at a time like this. And it's been really encouraging to see how I can find compromise and how that compromise trickles down into the other people that we work with. It creates more collaboration, and I think the sense that we're all in this together. So it's been challenging, but it has been certainly formative in terms of how I think about my work.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely relate with that myself. You bring up some really good points just around having sympathy and compromising and being able to really pivot. When this kind of all came to a head here in the States in that kind of late February, early March time period, we were just getting ready to take the FLA group on their in-person retreat, which, as you both know, is a pretty pivotal, critical piece of the program, right? We spend a couple of days together as a group in person during the program, and we ended up having to cancel that event. And obviously that was the right thing to do. It was the safest thing to do at the time, but it kind of turned the whole program on its head. And so I think we're seeing the same thing of really just having to be very flexible and to have a lot of tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity. Maybe pushing the margins a bit for my comfort level, but just kind of dealing with things as they come, and also being, as you said, trying to be really sympathetic to what everyone else is going through and how they're kind of experiencing this event. And I think that actually, like, Greer, so you really live and work in this mindful coaching, leadership coaching space. And we've gotten some really kind of good real world examples of what resiliency is. But as we start this conversation today, like what's the definition we should be working off of here?
Yeah, well, and I think Ben touched on, a lot of examples of what resilience during this time looks like. The ability to, be in the trenches of a situation and to look for an opportunity. Resilience, as the definition stands, is, the psychological, physical reserve tanks that we have within us when we're up against challenging circumstances that we can draw on. And the interesting thing about resilience is that oftentimes it's given a lot more airtime and thought after the crisis is over, or when we're on the other side of that really challenging experience, which has a lot of value in its own right. But as Kristen, you and I have had a couple of conversations about really leaning into it when you are in the thick of it has an immense amount of value. And from my business perspective too, Ben touched on some of these things as well, and we all have our own version of what resiliency looks like. And a lot of it is that ability to pivot. A lot of it is that ability to say, like, okay, these were our forecasting goals, and this is where we were taking the business this year, and COVID hits, and then it's like, oh, okay, you have to pull back from that kind of expansion growth, revenue centric mindset and into this place of purpose and values where you're saying, okay, at the end of the day, what is it that we're up to, and what is it that is serving and contributing? And if you can come from a place of purpose and value, that is a representation of what resilience looks like in the moment, right? That opportunistic, not in the ego sense, but where can you see the opportunity sense? I know for myself, I had to do that too, being a new business owner. Expansion, growth, revenue weren't the things that I could really, really act upon and make a ton of progress on when the world kind of shut down for a while. And so then it becomes about service and contribution. And so, yeah, resilience is really that ability for us to tap into that space within each of us that can allow us to persevere. And we're going to be needing to do it for a long time into the future. This isn't seemingly ending quickly. So.
Yeah. And so I think, for some folks, it's a little bit difficult to conceptualize these things without some sort of like process. And I guess, is there a process that goes along with this, or how do we do this stuff, I guess?
Sure. I was just going to share some perspective in terms of process just around business planning right now. The truth is the uncertainty is so significant that the range of possible outcomes is also very, very broad. It's been helpful for us as a business to recognize the breadth of the possible outcomes, but to commit to specific scenarios for specific types of decisions. Mm-hmm. And to stay aligned around that. We have one projection that's very important in terms of anticipating cash flow, and we have a slightly different projection that we're using in terms of how we plan inventory, and some of the other sort of key planning areas of the business. So that's been very helpful. Recognize the uncertainty, but at the same time align around a perspective. One of the other things that I was just thinking about as Greer was speaking there was just how important it's felt to me to give people grace right now, to give people space to navigate through this, and particularly to give myself that same space and that same patience, because we are grappling with things we've never had to work through before, and it's okay to just recognize, wow, these are really difficult times. And I feel like I've had the best conversations with some of my coworkers when the beginning of the conversation is just asking them, how are you doing? This must be really hard for you. I know it's really hard for me. It sets a really a great tone, and I think it solidifies personal relationships that make all the business stuff a lot easier.
Yeah, so just touching on what Ben had said, it's such a reflection of the organizations that are coming, and looking for support around. They're looking for support around these very things, right? Where the check-ins, Ben, that you're having with your coworkers and your direct reports, and you begin with a check-in, probably feels a little atypical to how you used to do them pre-COVID, right? And having some humility for this very common experience that the one of the unique things about COVID-19 is you don't have the luxury of looking in. Everyone is impacted by this, and so and seeing a lot of how do we manage these tough conversations like layoffs, and how do we prioritize this transparency and vulnerability. We want our teams to feel unified and coming together, and we want them to not feel locked out of decision-making processes. And so some of the things that Ben, you just touched on are what are making my work. People are understanding the value of some of this support in a way they never had before, and so it's been interesting too to navigate that through this experience. And from the point, just it's funny interpretation of a question, right? Kristen asks both of us the same question around process, around resiliency, and how to cultivate that. And, Ben, you've got your set of experiences through your lens, through supply chain lens, and at Sims. And for me, what I've really guided people through, whether it's on a leadership team level or an individual level or a department level, is, this process around, and this was starting to happen probably about a month ago, 5 weeks ago, but orienting people to like this acceptance recovery space, right? To give people some room to really adjust to the new landscape. And it sounds so simple, but a lot of people either typically run right into like reactive mode and immediately want to like freeze or fight it, or they want to get into solve mode immediately. And it bypasses this whole process around some acceptance as to what's actually going on. And then to me, I think, there is like this pretty solid adaptation process. And in that adaptation, Ben, you also mentioned some cool stuff that is part of it, right? Which is, okay, pretty quickly, y'all were pivoting into how can we help? How can we be of contribution and service, right? And I think the adaptation to the landscape, I think flexibility is a big part in this. What I had really seen pre-COVID-19 was this is how we make decisions, and these are our processes, and this is how it goes, and these are the people who are not part of the decision-making process, and these are the people who are. And it's been a really beautiful thing to watch some companies just like really flex with some of those processes. Yeah, and then Ben, you said one other thing too, like approaching some of these conversations with a really open-minded perspective. You are having sympathy and understanding for employees and coworkers, right, or people outside of your work life in a way that you probably might not had to that extent or not had a need to. And so I think that's part of the adaptation. And then you kind of pivot into I think this like persistence mode of, and then that's all about like, okay, the rediscovery and the realignment with purpose and values and meaningful engagement with teams now, but moving forward too, like what are you putting in place to engage with your people for months to come, right? Because as we said too, this isn't going to be a thing that just kind of ends and then we're back to normal. And then here, I think really intentional action plans are part of this phase too, and again, like kind of being on one hand really open to things changing, but also sticking with the plan. I think that's a really empowering piece of all this too. And again, Ben, you touched on some of those things too. So it sounds like y'all are already really putting a lot of this into practice and have been for a while. It's cool.
Well, I would just say, just comment how hard it is too, though. I mean,
Yeah.
What you described certainly resonates in terms of my experience and our experience here, but it is really challenging. It is really disruptive. That need for flexibility is so critical, and we're all equipped differently to handle that flexibility and embrace that flexibility. Some of us want predictability and certainty, and it can be really unsettling. Just another reason why sympathy is important, though, too, just because it is affecting people differently. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And two, I mean, acknowledging some of this doesn't mean it's easy. And having a process for managing, resilience or trying to keep it top of mind. I mean, we're in kind of an impossible situation right now, and everyone is just trying to be as mindful about it as they can. And it was a great point that you made too, like sympathy kind of breaks up that, those painful points, being able to have room for some of that, or compassion. And so it's really cool to hear.
That's great. Yeah, I'm definitely experiencing a lot of that on our side of things as well. As you said, people have different levels of kind of acceptance and flexibility for the unknown. And as I said in the beginning, I'm kind of being pushed to my margins, right? Of like, I can pivot and be flexible, but like, how much uncertainty do we have the capacity to manage? And so Greer, it's good to hear kind of that whole process that you laid out for us to kind of lean back into those steps if we need to, right? I feel like a lot of times with resiliency, it's one of those things that we just do without thinking in a lot of cases, like how we approach a crisis and we just get stuff done. It's that mentality. But we do end up reaching this kind of sticking point of, where do we go next, or how do we proceed? And I think that's when it's important to kind of lean into that sympathy, or that process of like how this actually looks psychologically and for us as we're trying to navigate the really difficult sticky points of this situation.
Well, just kind of as an extra footnote, I mean, I don't think it's a linear process. I don't think it's kind of like, okay, cool, I'm through this phase and now I can move on. And as I mentioned earlier, the cycles of grief. I mean, it is known about the cycles of grief that you can go back and forth between others, right? And they're really just ways to identify that you're at certain stages within this really difficult to navigate situation. And so I think, just noting that with a process, being willing to revisit certain parts of it, or being willing to say like, oh yeah, I was kind of rigid there with that meeting. Why was I rigid? What was I feeling, rigid about, or what am I feeling anxious about? And kind of revisiting some of that will shed light on the fact that, you can just hover between all of the above. But I think just approaching the whole thing with some compassion too, and like as Ben mentioned too, like sympathy for yourself in that. Think anything laced with judgment or shame just kind of compounds the experience. It doesn't really take away the feelings you're having anyway. So compassion is a big part of this right now.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear kind of just the business and individual perspectives of this, because obviously in FLA, we talk a lot about like vulnerability and vulnerable leadership and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of times there's that 6-month period where you get to focus on that and you really get to dig into it. And then we all go back to our normal lives. Whereas I think this is giving us a really great opportunity to exercise a lot of those things that, we talk about or we learn about, or we read a lot of articles about how it's so important, but it's easier to just kind of get into that routine of, ticking along and checking the boxes. And now, as Ben, you said, we're really having to exercise that sympathy on a daily basis. We're having to exercise, those more emotional parts of ourselves to say, how are you doing? How can we better support you? And having difficult conversations with a lot of sympathy and empathy woven into them.
I've never been so good at disagreeing right now. It's something our one of my close colleagues who I've worked with since I started at Sims, she and I have kind of climbed up through the organization together, and she's on the finance team, and she really needs to think a lot about worst case scenarios. It's just the responsibility that she has, and that can be frustrating when you want to invest in opportunities. It creates a difference of opinion, and I know it's been really gratifying for me to come to a place with this individual where we don't feel like we always have to be in 100% agreement. It's okay to have tension, and to have that dialogue in a really civil and thoughtful way. It's something I'm much better at now than I was before.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, I definitely think, Ben, it seems like Sims as an organization has really kind of leaned into this and is taking this in stride and doing the best that they can to be mindful about the situation. But I'm sure that there are other organizations, especially within the industry, who are struggling or maybe stuck with this. And so I guess, like, what advice would you give to someone who's really struggling in dealing with the flexibility needed and the empathy needed, and like, where do they start, I guess?
Oh, I think getting some alignment around the different scenarios that you think are realistic for your business could be a really helpful starting place, just because it becomes less of an emotional debate, and you can kind of take some of that off the table. Accept the uncertainty, but just say we do have to commit to one plan or another, maybe multiple plans. Let's align and let's take that off the table so that we don't have to have that as an ongoing discussion point. And then the other thing I think we've done pretty well here, I'm sure we could do a better job, is really just being hypersensitive to how people are navigating through this more broadly in the organization, and trying to address that by really ramping up the communication. And that individual communication on one-on-one conversations, but it's also been company-wide communication from CEO, other executive team members, just providing transparency, not trying to sugarcoat the challenges we face, but just making people feel informed. Because I think particularly when we're alone, working from home, we get into some sort of funk. It's easy for things to kind of spiral a little bit. You start to think about those worst case scenarios. I think transparency and communication is one antidote to that frame of mind. So I think that's been helpful. Again, I think it's something we can do a better job of, but we've really tried hard to improve there.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to the prioritizing communication and transparency, I mean, I reiterate that kind of over and over, right? Like, especially when people are needing that kind of support, I'll simply ask them, like, what is your level of communication with your teams, or how is it that you are navigating the decision making process, and when you get new information, how is it that you're giving it out to your organization, and how do two-way conversations look like, right? I think there is something to be said for like those communications outward are awesome, and I think as you said, Ben, or in my words, right, work in progress. Like you can always be growing in that way, and what's getting set up to allow the people who are on the receiving ends of those communications also have a voice and speak up. And a lot of what my conversations center around is this thing called psychological safety, and it's a really amazing concept just around. And I mainly deal with it on an organizational level, but to what extent, especially during change, are people comfortable in speaking up and voicing their opinions, and the willingness to at least pose an idea, or make a mistake without fear of repercussion. And obviously COVID-19 offers a different flavor because impacts of decisions feel like there's more at stake, right? But even navigation around that, mutual trust and respect, right? How is that established? I think these are the things that allow entities to move forward in a meaningful way. And two, I don't know, Ben, I'd be curious to hear some of your experiences on this, but a lot of what I'm hearing from the consumer level in the industry is, they're wanting to hear from brands. They're not really wanting to necessarily be pushed to buy. They're wanting to hear from you and hear how you're navigating through this and how you've grown as an organization and the decisions you're making. It's creating that emotional bond between consumer and company, and setting a more solid foundation for loyalty over time. So just curious if you had any thoughts or experiences from that.
Yeah, it's been interesting. We certainly had a negative impact on our sales, but all of the metrics in terms of our brand have never been stronger. We have just incredible amounts of engagement with our customers right now, and it seems that a lot of new people are learning about Sims and engaging with our brand and our product. So I agree with you. I think people are seeking community, and I think that authentic brands are part of community for a lot of people. So that is an opportunity for sure. I was struck by what you said in terms of this idea of psychological safety. And that's something I've really grappled with, because we have conversations at the executive team level that by necessity can sort of fixate around worst case scenarios. It's something that we need to think about. And I've found that's not a productive topic for most people in the organization, particularly if their factors are totally out of their control. Anything that creates anxiety and fear unnecessarily, I think is really counterproductive. And so it's a challenge of how do you maintain a healthy environment where people feel motivated and not fearful, while still being really honest and transparent. And there's nuance to that communication that I don't think the challenge should be underestimated. There's an art to communicating uncertainty in a way that doesn't make people fearful.
Yes.
I've come to appreciate that.
Yeah, really. I mean, even as you first started, you've learned a lot through this process. It sounds like it. I mean, I think when uncertainty occurs, it sends us into this completely like reptilian place where we're kind of forced and shoved into a corner, and we're looking over our shoulder and hoping we're not about to get laid off, or it's fraught this whole time. And it takes some mindfulness, and it takes some self-introspection, and it takes some investigating as to our own habits. Like, why do I get stuck in worst case scenario? Why do I kind of marinate in this fear? A lot of people identify very heavily too with their role or status at work, right? It's very ego driven, and it takes some time to kind of like weed a lot of that out. My guess is too that if that's showing up a lot in organizations, or particular individuals, within organizations tend to stay there, it's likely that they do that outside of the workplace as well. So that's a lot of that is about general relationship to the world and their life, and et cetera. A little bit of a tangential conversation, but it's an interesting one. And the piece around psychological safety, I mean, it's the number one determiner of company and organizational success, right? When people are afraid and there are barriers to communication, effective decision making can't happen. Meaningful growth and movement forward can't happen, at least not over time. It can happen short term. And yeah, that's in part a lot of where I spend my conversations, is just kind of helping people navigate what that looks like for their own organization. And it's so interesting just to see how it shifts and moves the needle. Even if the needle isn't necessarily like a monetary needle, but it's more of like a felt needle. Like, it's like, wow, we engage way differently now than we ever did before. And, I've never been the person who would speak up in meetings because I just, that coworker didn't ever like my ideas. And so I'm just going to hold back, right? Those things have such impact. So it's really cool.
I was just going to say, I've had multiple experiences where I have had to craft some sort of delicate communication about how what's happening in the world is impacting the company or impacting employees. And it's never been more important for me to write the communication, pause, go do something else, and just think on it for a little bit.
Just marinate.
I've had multiple instances where I've come back around and just fundamentally changed the tone. And I'm really grateful that I did, because I think the way that it was received would have been totally different if I had just sent the initial communication. So that's one piece of advice for anybody who's in this situation, is give yourself a little bit more time and a little bit more space to get things right. Trust your instincts for sure. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right.
There's a reason. Yeah. Can you speak quickly to, what was kind of on your mind when you wrote it the first time, and then what was on your mind when you came back to it?
Yeah, sure. It was right when we were going into shelter in place here, and I knew that we weren't going to be able to manufacture waders in Bozeman, and that all of the people that were working in our factory were going to be facing some real challenges as a result. And my first instinct was, I just need to be transparent. I just need to rip the Band-Aid off and just tell folks how it is. And went for a skate ski, went for a Nordic ski, and about 3/4 of the way through, I was like, there's no way I can send this the way that I just wrote it. And I came back and just found a way to soften the tone so that it wasn't so brutally honest, so black and white. Wove a little bit of my own kind of anxiety and fear into it as well, so that folks knew that I wasn't just looking at this completely from the outside. It was more about tone than anything, though. It was really just sort of the words and kind of the organization for how the information was communicated.
Yeah.
So that's one example.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things we talk a lot about is this intentional transparency, right? Vulnerability and transparency without any boundaries doesn't feel as great, and it doesn't actually land as well. And it's not actually like, I don't know if this, the boundaries piece is really important, and that space of a Nordic ski, right? To realize like, oh, there's more that needs to be included, because the way this lands and the way that this is received is really important to me, and being able to like create kind of a new container for that is a really cool distinction. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
This is really exciting for me to hear, just because I feel like this is a terrible situation that we've been put in. It's super uncertain. It was like unexpected at the level that it's happening at. But I feel like there could be a lot of good that comes out of this. Like, I think we're really reframing how we operate our businesses and how we interact with our employees as individuals. And so I'd love to hear, like, what things would you love to see improve, and how can we kind of stick to that as we start to move out of this, like, really being in the thick of things sort of time?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to echo a little bit about what I've said. What I'd really say is, on an individual level, I'd love to see through this, you know, a kind of stronger sense of compassion with whatever it is that you're feeling, right? Change or no change. I think there has always been quite a bit of judgment around particularly negative emotions that we go through, and we get kind of stuck on the optics of our lives in the sense that, well, my life looks this way, so I shouldn't be feeling this. So I've been seeing a lot of that, and so I'd say, like, on an individual level, moving forward, I'd love to see people embracing whatever they're feeling just on a more holistic level over time. And then, you know, organizationally, just, you know, from the things that I see more on the business side, you know, I'd love to see teams, entities, organizations, associations prioritizing, you know, the communication and the vulnerability and the psychological safety and the intentional engagement with one another, and really, you know, reconnecting with purpose and values and acting from that place. And yeah, just really unifying, being less driven by ego and status and expansion, and more about, you know, how are we benefiting the world and our communities, and how are we really being in action on that purpose and values. So I'd say those would be things that I would love to see on an ongoing basis. And the truth is, I think they're very possible to do over time. I don't think these are huge changes, but I think because of the way that we currently pre-COVID-19, the way we related to life and our world, it didn't include a lot of this for a lot of us, at least not in a prioritized way. And so but I think this experience is allowing a lot of people to understand, as we've talked about today, the benefits of looking at things kind of through this additional lens. So.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would also add, I think the flexibility piece that you mentioned earlier, I think that's going to be something that I hope that we carry on from this. And I think flexibility in terms of how we work, and just the adaptability and the open-mindedness in terms of how we approach problems, but also flexibility in terms of how we work, whether it's home or office, in person or video. You know, I'm somebody who normally has to travel internationally 3 or 4 times a year at least, and it's been a long chunk of time that I haven't been in Asia or Central America with our manufacturers, and I can see how that time is valuable. But I also have formed a perspective that maybe I didn't need to travel as much as I did. A lot of that stuff I can do from here, and so I think it's forced us to think differently about some of that. I also think for people who are younger and sort of climbing up through companies and through the industry, most of us have not experienced a major macro shock, like a big economic shock like this. And it's really eye-opening in terms of how a business should approach operational decisions in anticipation that something like this could happen. You know, it's just leaner organizations in terms of the people that are working, but also how we spend our money. And I think you could tell somebody all day long, you should be prepared for something like this to happen. But until you live through this, I don't think it really means as much. And so I think it's formative in terms of anticipating something like this again in the future. I'm sure it'll be different, but I'm also certain that we're going to experience something like this again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I graduated in 2008, 2009, and that was right around the time of our last terrible recession. And I remember, like, coming out into that world felt really scary, but being in the place that I'm at today, professionally, life-wise, and dealing with it on the level I am is much scarier, right? And so it's a lot of really trying to, as Greer, as you said, like, accept, you know, what we're going through. But Ben, you also bring up a great point of, like, this is not going to be the last time that something along these lines or some great shock like this happens. And so how can we come at these things, you know, better prepared, both as individuals and also, you know, organizations and businesses and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can design resiliency into businesses to a certain extent. Resiliency is we've really talked about it in terms of people, but I think you can build resilient processes, this sort of resiliency in the structure of a company as well. And I've certainly been thinking a lot about that because we have acute problems that we need to address. And it's really important for me and for my colleagues that we address them with long-term solutions, not just with Band-Aids. Long-term solutions that would make us healthier should we encounter this again. So that gives me hope. I think that's one of the opportunities that is uncovered.
Yeah. Anything else you feel like we should cover before we sign off? Or
well, I have a question for Greer. As you work with your clients through this whole process, are you experiencing a different type of challenge or a different scale of challenge for people at different levels of an organization? Does it seem that do you see any consistency in terms of how this is impacting employees?
Yeah, I am. I would say that I would say a few things. I would say that, typically when I'm dealing with leadership teams, the areas that they're needing support around have a little bit of a different flavor to them than say like kind of manager and beneath that. As I kind of mentioned before, leadership teams are, and they're also coming at it with more experience and more understanding of landscape and more time in the trenches and quite pragmatic, which is definitely a distinction too with some of the younger, more manager or new to industry people that I deal with. So I'd say like kind of from director and up, it feels like the more pragmatic conversations, it's how do we bring teams together? How do we navigate these higher level forecasting decisions and that decision-making process and with and a little more openness to seeing the other side of the coin, right? We've related to decision making X, Y, and Z way, and we're kind of seeing that maybe there's another way we should be looking at this. What does that look like? So they feel a lot more higher level conversations. Younger individuals, especially ones that are newer to the industry and at varying levels of experience within their own roles, a lot of fear about job security, a lot of fear about, a lot of individuals that I've spoken with maybe weren't psyched in their current role, were looking to pivot anyway, and now feel like they can't, right? So it's a lot, and then it's more about self-discovery work and what does my passion even mean and what are my purpose and values even mean on an individual level. So I'd say there is a definite distinction. The conversations that I have with more leadership teams are less like fear. You can feel the fear less. They're more like how do we be in action? How do we move forward in a meaningful way? And more individual, I'm seeing like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. And I need some support around figuring that out. And I hope I keep my job. So I don't know if that answers your question, but everyone
it does, yes. The comment you made about people feeling like they're maybe a bit stuck. They had ideas in terms of pivoting, or perhaps they had been really investing in career development. Just through the work I've done as a mentor in the program, I've gotten to know several people over the last few years who have been in the midst of certainly investing in their careers, but also thinking about going down different paths. And I know that what's going on right now has really put a hold on a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I think it maybe exacerbates the fact that some people kind of felt stuck already. I think some of us, we're working for brands because we have a personal connection to the company or the lifestyle around that brand. And there aren't a lot of opportunities to do this type of work at a variety of different companies.
Right.
So there was a lack of mobility already, and I can see how this would make that even more of a challenge. So that's an interesting one to think about.
Yeah, it is. And to your point, through conversations, yes, they were feeling stuck anyway. But with some, they're feeling stuck in certain aspects. And a lot of times what I see is individuals aren't happy at work. They want to leave the role, or they want to leave the organization because they make their either dissatisfaction or discontentment, or whatever the thing is, about the entirety of the scenario, and more often than not, it's specific elements of the scenario that can actually be really navigated through and don't require leaving, which feels really liberating for individuals. Like whether it's a team dynamic situation, or the role isn't exactly a fit, and we talk about, okay, what would it look like for you to have a conversation with your boss about adding in this new component of your role, right? And so having them just kind of take a step back and expand the lens of the view. So it has been cool to navigate with them in that way, because they'll come to me being like, I need to quit my job and now I feel like I can't. And then all of a sudden the conversation is actually about, oh, I needed to have that conversation with my boss, and I was just scared to have it.
Yeah, it's you make the point that there are also opportunities emerging in terms of career right now. And in some cases, it's because teams are getting a bit leaner and we're asking individuals to do more. But I've also had a couple folks that I work with leave the company voluntarily because they were anxious about the future, and they had an opportunity. I know opportunities are rare right now, but they had opportunities and chose to address the anxiety they had here and jump on something new. And that's created space for us to promote from within.
Cool.
And that, always, I think, sends a positive message. It gives people a little boost of inspiration. But it's, your comments just made me think that even though it seems like career development and some of these bigger questions are on pause, that isn't necessarily true. That there are opportunities to take on more, to kind of reorient in terms of career path. Perhaps more opportunity right now than usual because things are really disrupted.
There's just room to explore, for sure.
Yeah.
I think I'm seeing that a lot with a lot of our FLA folks and FLA alumni. Like, this whole situation, as you said, Ben, it's so disruptive. It's turned so many things on its head that a lot of the perspective is like, if not now, when, sort of thing, of like having those difficult conversations or taking on that new project, or if you've experienced a furlough or a layoff, leveraging that time to go back to school or take a class or learn a new skill, in between kind of balancing, the rest of your responsibilities. So I do kind of think it's, in a way, as I said, it's turned everything on its head, and it's kind of this perspective of, we just don't know what the future holds, and so why not go for these things now? Have those difficult conversations, ask for that new project, all that kind of good stuff. So.
Well, and that does bring it full circle on the topic at hand. The ability to do that in the moment strengthens that resilient place within us and allows us to see I was terrified and I spoke up anyway. It's not something I typically would have done, and I was scared I was going to lose my job over that, but I didn't. Or whatever the particular, because there's an internal narrative that is always playing and dictating our decisions, whether it's a quiet or loud narrative. And so, just to the point of, to the extent that people can notice when they are holding back in some of those ways and not going after kind of what their intuition is saying, as Ben noted too with his letter it was a letter to your consumers, or and how it got modified, right? Just sitting with it and realizing that making a few shifts felt more true to who he was. It's really cool, and a really good expression of that too. So it occurs all over the place, in the small things, in the big things.
Awesome. Well, I think that's actually a great note to kind of close things up on to bring everything full circle. So Ben and Greer, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, for anyone out there listening, if you're interested in learning more about what OIA does, or if you're interested in FLA, the Future Leadership Academy, I'd encourage you to visit our website, www.outdoorindustry.org, or just reach out to one of these great folks who have gone through the program, and I'm sure would love to speak with you. It makes my heart happy to hear such great things from our alumni. And I hope that the program has made a difference for you in these uncertain times.